Hey guys, Pastor Ben here with another review and reflection. Today I want to talk about this book, The New Children's Bible by Vries with illustrations by Fred Apps. This is put out by Christian Focus Publications over in the UK. My family and I have been going through this for our evening worship. We've been reading a story out of this most nights for quite a while now and just finished it the other week. And so I thought I'd give a brief review of this children's story Bible. So a couple of things just to mention at the beginning. I was surprised to find we've been reading about halfway through this book, and I thought it was Anne de Vries, some nice Dutch lady. In fact, it's actually a Dutch gentleman from the early 20th century. I think it's Anne de Vries, as I used to say his name. But digging in a bit more of his biography, he was an author, wrote a number of well-known novels about regional Dutch life, rural Dutch life and things, a couple of novels set during World War II as well. And he kind of lived, I think his dates were like 1904 to 1960 or something like that. And I think it was back in the 30s that he wrote this book, originally in Dutch, the New Children's Bible. So it's not quite as new as it once was, but was translated from Dutch into English back in the 90s, and then Christian Focus put together a kind of new version of that text with new illustrations, and published it about, I think, 10 or 20 years ago. So you can find this very accessibly around. It is a very well-written children's Bible. Apparently it's kind of been a very well-loved children's Bible in Europe in general, and now that it's in English, it's something that we can enjoy in English-speaking context as well. So like most story Bibles, this is trying to give you, introduce children to both the Old and New Testaments, and it does that by giving short accounts of famous Bible stories. So just to show you kind of a sampling of the book, this study Bible, or story Bible rather, is a bit more text heavy than some are. Some have a lot of pictures, very little text. This will usually give you, 2 or 3 pages, somewhere between 1 and 3 pages for each story that it tells. Like here's the story of creation. You've got 2 pages. Here the story of Adam and Eve is 1 page. The story of the snake, the fruit, and sin, 2 pages. So kind of giving you a feel for that. A few of them that have bigger pictures might be even 3 pages. But they're very short, very digestible chunks of scripture. So I like that. That's very helpful. Also, he will also give the reference in the Bible where this story is coming from. So if you had maybe kind of a range of children, we pretty much just went through the text of this in our devotions, and then we would talk about it as we go. But if I had older children, I would probably do something like, read this, the short story, and then maybe, for morning worship, let's say, and then for evening worship, maybe you go and you read, Genesis chapter 1 straight from the Bible, but your kids have already kind of been primed for that. They know what to expect, that kind of thing. So it kind of gives you ways where you can use this story Bible with the real Bible to help bring them together. So I think that's a helpful thing. The illustrations are very well done, I think, in general. And if there's a criticism I have, it's that it's not with the illustrations themselves. It's just that, like, you have this great illustration here, but it's just really, really small. And sometimes you'll get a larger version of that, but oftentimes you get these kind of small pictures. I would rather have had a thicker study Bible that had the same amount of text. I'm not looking to sacrifice that, but maybe just had, a full page picture rather than just a little snippet here and there. That's not a major criticism, but just something that, is different than how a lot of study Bibles do it. There are some larger pictures that come, but they're, fewer and further between. However, the illustrations are actually one of the things that drew me to get this book originally, because Christian Focus, the publisher who put this out, is a Reformed publisher, and they put out quite a bit of children's material, Bibles, prayer books, history books, things like that. But they are committed to the kind of classic Reformed belief that we should not make images of Christ, and that's something that I, as a Reformed pastor, would hold to. The reasons for that may be something for another video, but if you do hold to that belief that images of Christ are not God-honoring and not something that he's commanded us to do, then the struggle of trying to find material that you can use with your children, because so much of the children's material that's put out, so many of the well-known and famous study Bibles, have a lot of images of Jesus, right? My wife and I both appreciate, although I've got some quibbles with it, but we both appreciate the Jesus Storybook Bible that Sally Lloyd Jones put together in terms of the text. I like the way it's very redemptive historical, and it ties the different stories together and shows how they're all pointing to Jesus. That's wonderful. But the illustrations are a problem, and we had to kind of navigate that. So we've actually read through that with our girls, but without the pictures, at least in the New Testament, which creates a kind of disconnect that's a bit challenging. But Christian Focus with Fred Apps has put together a book that has a wonderful text and good illustrations, and they don't have pictures of Jesus. So if that is a concern for you theologically, this is a wonderful resource to have on hand. So a couple things, more things to add. This is a fairly brief review, but this, because it is a bit more text heavy, is probably good for ages 3 and 4 and up, and would probably be good up through 10 years old, 8 to 10 years old, something like that. So if you have kids getting into middle school or something, I mean they're going to be ready to just be reading the Bible straight, I would say, for sure by that point. Really little kids, our 2-year-old's not going to sit in our lap and listen to this. But for those that are kind of, they're talking and up, they should be able to listen to these stories. They're not too long. They're explained well. And the thing I like about them is that Vries really does a good job of just kind of summarizing the story of the Bible. So there's very little editorializing. There's very little interpretation or additions. It's mostly just a short version of the story as it's found in the Bible. There are a couple of exceptions to that. There are a few times where he kind of adds in a comment, and I go, that's not in the original, that's not in the scriptural text itself, or glosses over something that I actually think was important. And I can't think of the examples off the top of my head, but there were a few points where that happened, but not very much. In general, he's just summarizing the story of the Bible in a pretty accurate way. I find that helpful. However, the weakness of that is some story Bibles can be very kind of moralistic. They kind of give you the story and then say, and here's the moral of the story. You should be more like this person. And that approach has rightly come under a lot of criticism, because it tends to communicate moralism, works righteousness, and it almost turns the Bible stories into kind of like a biblical Aesop's fables, where it's like, here's the story and here's what you learn from it, well, there are moral implications for the Bible, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10, the things that happened to our fathers were given for our example, for us to learn from, both positively and negatively. So it's not wrong to have those examples, but the Bible, especially the Old Testament, is often only dealt with as kind of a collection of examples, and that's actually missing the point, because the reason the Old Testament exists is to point us to Christ, who is the center of not only the New Testament's teaching, but the Old Testament's teaching as well. And so there have been a lot of story Bibles, I keep mixing that up, there have been a lot of story Bibles recently that have done a really good job of drawing out that big picture of the Bible. Right, my family and I have just, now that we've finished this story Bible, we've started reading Kevin DeYoung's big story Bible, the biggest story, which is from the first page spelling out this is all about Jesus, it's all about the gospel, and it's drawing that out really, really well. That's a real good strength a lot of new story Bibles have. This doesn't do that hardly at all. And I think that's because he's not editorializing and he's not interpreting. But there were so many points where I felt, as a parent and as a pastor, like I just wanted to take it a step further, and I did. So I would just say, as a parent, as a father, leading your family in this, go beyond what's in this. Let this summarize the story. It has a few pictures to keep the kids engaged, and then you make the connection to Christ. Show how it's pointing forward to the gospel. With all of these things, use them as tools, right? That's the key. And I think you'll find a lot to value. But I wish that it had more of those redemptive historical connections and perspective that it was bringing to bear. Having said that, it does not really fall into moralism either. It's just a good summary of the Bible. So this is actually a very strong offering, I would say, if you're just trying to kind of introduce your kids to the content of the scriptures. There's going to need to be more work in terms of the teachings of the Bible. But if you were doing like this in the morning and like maybe doing catechism questions in the afternoon or in the evening or something, then you would actually have a good bit of both, the kind of just stories of the Bible and then what those stories mean, what they teach us about ourselves, about God, about Christ, about his church, about his world. So this is a book that I would strongly recommend every parent to have, on their shelf. It wouldn't be the only book I would recommend, but definitely a great resource, particularly for those of us who are trying to find good material that we can use with our kids that doesn't use images of Christ. So I would highly recommend The New Children's Bible by De Vries with illustrations by Fred Apps.